So excited for our guest today. Marcela, how are you? It's so good to have you on the show.
Happy to be here. Happy to be here. Thank you for
Yeah,
having me.
so I spoke a little bit about this in the intro, but before I really got into coaching and personal growth, I was obsessed with foodie culture. I like all the Food Network shows. I love reading the books, the magazines, the shows, everything about it. So if anyone doesn't know who you are, can you share a little bit about yourself and your career?
Absolutely. I'm a chef. I'm from Mexico. I grew up in Tijuana. And for the last, whatever, 20 years, I just turned in, or I just came out with book number 6, which is an illustrated cookbook that's in English and Spanish with the favorite recipes of my families. I have one coming out from all of the cooking classes that I do online. I've been cooking my whole life, and the journey has always been to just represent Mexico and our culture in an accurate light, far away from the stereotype. The vehicle has always been food. I've been on the Food Network. Been network television. I've done all the judging, all of the things, all of the fun things that you get to do when you do TV cooking. And my joy now is in writing cookbooks and bringing artisanal product from Mexico to the US. I have a shop, Casa Marcela. So just anything that brings beautiful Mexico to the beautiful audience I have in the US.
Oh, I love that so much. I think one of the biggest blessings of living in San Diego is that literally we're 20 minutes away at most from this gorgeous country.
Yes.
The coast is so beautiful here. Tijuana has so many beautiful treasures, and then it's such a great jumping off point too to travel within Mexico. So I'm so grateful for that as well. How, like, for anyone who's aspiring, whether it's to, become a TV star or, just become more affluent in their own professions, like what you've been able to accomplish is short of extraordinary. How did you do all this? Like, what was your backstory? How did you get involved and really go for your dreams like that?
Um, I think that, the word that came into my head as you were kind of developing your question was perseverance. I sent my a tape, and this is just like people ask for this formula all the time, and there is no formula. There just isn't. There's just things that happen along the way. But my personal story is I sent a tape of myself cooking to the network, a VHS tape. That's how old I am. I sent them a VHS tape of myself cooking. Um, how old am I now? About 25, 23 years ago. And I sent them the tape when I was about 19 or 20, when I was assisting my aunt who's a chef in Mexico. And we sent a tape of us cooking, and they invited me to be on as a guest, and that established kind of a connection with the network. But from that moment to when they actually gave me my own show, when my career in TV cooking started, 10 years passed. 10
Mm.
years. So for 10 years, I kept calling, I kept insisting, I kept getting myself like guest appearances, I kept working on my craft, I kept getting myself on local TV. And um, it was definitely challenging, but when I was coming up, like being on TV for cooking wasn't like now we have social media, like everybody cooks in front of a camera now. That's just what you do. Like even people that aren't dedicated to food, you post your food. That's just people are used to cameras and food and talking about food and posting their breakfast or their vegan meal or their smoothie or their enchiladas. Like people now have cameras and food are one and the same.
Yeah.
When I was coming up, it wasn't a thing. So when people are asking me if it was challenging, in the moment, I didn't feel that it was because there weren't that many Latinas on TV trying to cook the foods that I grew up with. There were definitely some, and I'm not going to take any credit away from them, but I think I knew that I had something that was worth sharing that wasn't out there in the world. So I was just kind of focused and determined to get that out there. And that just became the motivator. And like I said, I would find platforms, whether it be local TV, and then national TV started happening, and then they gave me a show. Like it was a snowball effect, but it took 10 years to get that show.
Oh, I love your answer so much because we often see the finished product and we don't understand the backstory, the years and years of failures and trying and really taking just an idea out of your head and putting yourself out there to face rejection. I mean, that's terrifying. And yet that's the only way you can make it happen. And so that perseverance is such a great skill that you cultivated with that. I love it so much. And I know you also, we're here on the show talking about changing your relationship with alcohol. So, like, at what time and what point did that become something that really became cognizant of you of like, you know what, I want this to look differently in my life, and this is
Yeah.
what I'm going to do about it?
Um, Alcoholism is not only prevalent like in my family on both sides. It's a huge part of my culture. And I just did a live, I told you about this with my followers on Instagram. And where I come from, our legal drinking age in Mexico, where I grew up, is 18. So it's perfectly acceptable to begin alcohol consumption at about 14, 15 years old, but approved by adults. Like it's part of like a quinceañera, our sweet 16, but in Mexico it's 15. Perfectly acceptable to have alcohol. Like it is ingrained in our culture. It's how we grew up. I grew up with barrels of the most authentic and beautiful tequila in my house. Like alcohol permeates every aspect of your life in Mexico. I think more than the US, honestly. I think it's just it was a huge part of my upbringing on the south side of the border. Massive. First time I got drunk, I was probably 14, 15 years old on that barrel of tequila that my dad had at home. Like it was just a huge part of our life. And I knew from early on that drinking was gave me feelings of guilt and anxiety and things that I hated. Like I always knew what would happen, how I would feel after I drank. Like it's something that has, some people are really good drinkers. I mean, I don't know if there's such a thing, but what I'm saying is I was definitely around people that didn't hold, like I knew going into it that I hated what happened the next day or later that night. Like I knew since I was very young, but I continued to do it. I've always been very socially anxious. And I mentioned this to my followers as well. I don't hate alcohol. It was my crutch that got me through a very socially anxious, depression ridden teenage years and early 20s. And maybe if I hadn't had alcohol in those years, I maybe would not have left my room or my apartment in LA. Like it was like in some twisted, sorted way, alcohol allowed me, because I didn't have the tools to deal with those issues, that was my tool. And now I am able to see that gratitude. It no longer serves me. It's no longer a part of my life. And and this is what's different about my journey. I know the date it was. I know it was like September 6th because it was my sister's birthday, but I don't even know if it was 3 years or 4 years ago. Like I don't even attach myself too much to the days. I'm not counting. It's not my thing. One day I saw somebody in my life that had been drinking. I did not like the way that looked. And for the first time in my life, after 30 years of drinking heavily, like maybe 2 or 3 times a week, I just decided that this thing just no longer served me and it needed to be out of my life. And I stopped.
I'm just so touched to your story. And I think there's so many things that people relate to, especially that social anxiety. And when we are younger, like maybe, yes, sure, it does serve us. It serves this purpose, and it's outgrowing that though. It's like, I'm an adult now. I have the tools now. I know how to take care of myself. I know how to practice this confidence skill that I'm learning. I don't need this anymore, So I really like how you reflect on that. And also too, the cultural aspect. I think that really is true. I mean, obviously, I think most people in Western society have we just shove down our throats. Like this is what we do as teenagers and stuff. But when I traveled to Latin America as well, especially in a corporate culture, like you're expected then to go out with your boss or your colleagues after work and drink all night and do it again the next day and the next day and the next day. And there's very few options to like be outside of that. I'm really curious, being from this celebrity chef world, like I really fundamentally believe that, in the past, someone maybe would decide that they're not going to drink anymore. And it was as if it was their personal problem, right? It's like, this was my problem I had, instead of really reflecting, maybe this is more of a bigger picture. Maybe this is a societal thing that's going on. So as you work in this food industry, I mean, how much is food? I mean, and wine, it's literally like a word, it just mashes in my mind. How much is alcohol glamorized there as well, and never thought of as maybe the party, but more of this is the flavor of sophistication. This is how you're glamorous with these food and wine tastings.
Right. And I definitely played into that because my last years of drinking solely revolved around that. Like my body could no longer handle heavy drinking, but I was like, well, I'm going to continue to enjoy my wine. Because it was justified. It was a pairing. That's how you eat certain proteins. That's how you, that's an aperitif. Like there's this, like you said, this culture around it that makes it completely justifiable. Now, I have to be fully honest. I do believe that there are ways of, like I see it in my partner in Philip. He will sip on tequila maybe once a week. I don't have an issue with that. I think he has full control over it. I don't see it affecting his life or his health. He's actually a health nut. He does a ton of exercise. So in my mind, I believe that I do see that he doesn't have an unhealthy relationship with it, but that's my perspective. Like, I believe that that is possible. But for myself, I definitely, in the beginning, when I was trying to not drink for health reasons, I do remember, like, we were shooting this show, The Kitchen, we had a segment like at the end of the show that was, it's called It's 5 o'clock somewhere. But then they realized that that was that they couldn't use that phrase because somebody trademarked, like, whatever. But we had an alcohol segment and I wasn't drinking. And I remember how ashamed I felt about not drinking, how I felt like I was ruining the segment, how I felt like I was a burden on the segment, on the production, as a chef, as like kind of like a party pooper to the viewing audience. Like, I had so much shame around not wanting to drink because it wasn't like we were doing shots. It was like you said, it was just like, we're just kind of sipping on a martini or, a tastefully made margarita. We're not doing shots. Like, why don't you want to? And that was in the years like prior to me stopping drinking completely. And I was just so like, yeah, I didn't feel that I could be a legitimate chef if alcohol wasn't a part of it. I was like, what kind of chef am I going to be if I'm at an event and I can't talk about what wine you pair my mole with? You know what I'm saying? Like, it took a while for me to have the courage to openly say, no, I don't drink. I don't do pairings. I will not promote your alcohol. Like, it took a while for me to work up that courage because it's definitely a part of the culture.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm wondering, the alcohol-free movement, where I think more people are getting permission to reevaluate it, whatever their drinking looks like, whether it's for health reasons or they want to be a better role model or just have energy every day. It's really been growing. And so something that's kind of been shifting in our culture, there's, articles in the New York Magazine or the New York Times about mocktails and this different thing. Do you ever see that permeating into the food world? Like, I mean, I know obviously Andrew Zimmerman, for example, I think doesn't drink. And I'm sure there's other celebrity chefs that have kind of come out. The big one from South Carolina, I can't think of his name right now. But is that more of like the rock and roll crash and burn story? Or do you see it also shifting in just the culture of what you drink? Are mocktails a thing yet?
No. I think it's totally shifting. We're living in the different world. Somebody pointed out they're not chefs, but at the Super Bowl halftime show, I think 3/4 of the performers of all of our Cali rappers were sober.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Somebody posted about it, like, nobody's paying attention to the fact that 3 out of the 4 performers or whatever. And it's like a thing now, and it's beautiful. And I often talk to chefs. It is not what it was when I was coming up. It is not. People understand, like it used to be before. The more you dabbled in excess, the cooler and more legitimate you were as a chef. Like, you were a rock star because you did Coke and you could drink a bottle of vodka. That was considered cool when I was coming up as a chef. Not even kidding. Like, you would work, you would do your rush hour shift, and then you would go out and get completely hammered on your choice of venom. And then you would sleep during the day, and then you would come into the restaurant like at night for your next shift. Like, it was a part of the culture, and it has shifted 100%. It has definitely shifted. I hear you just mentioned too, and I can't mention any on the top of my head, but if I did my homework, I could give you a whole list. There are a lot of chefs now that are into their health. They're into their bodies. They're looking at the ways they eat. We have so many more Michelin-starred chefs that are now even vegan. So many mocktail pairings in Michelin-starred restaurants. Like, it's a whole thing. It's a whole culture. And I think it just has to do with I think social media actually help. It's very damaging in some senses, but I think there's a lot of awareness now that we didn't have before, a lot of more information that we didn't have before.
Yeah, I love to see that. And, especially as just events, grow around the country, whether it's a food and wine festival or anything like that. Again, not to like judge or not include alcohol or something like that, but just having this one eye on inclusiveness, like maybe not everybody wants to drink. Let's make sure we have those options. And I think the beverage companies coming up are just incredible in that space.
My friend Rebecca Pepler, that writes for the New York Times, she brought an actual drink, or not, it's not a non-alcoholic drink, but it's a non-alcoholic like aperitif that tastes bitter and is like different scents of fruits or citruses. And I was like, how totally cool. And she's like, I know you don't drink. And she writes about drinks in the Times and stuff. So she was like, I brought this for you. And I was like, how totally cool that this is on your radar, and I think it's on everybody's radar now.
Yeah. And I think it's just going to grow from there. So, you come up as a Latina chef and really doing something different. And that kind of really got you attention at first. And then we talk also about just the over drinking, glamorization of alcohol in different cultures we grow up in, and especially in Latin culture. What does sobriety look like in Latin culture? Like, is that a thing? Is it demonized?
I'll tell you why it's super weird. Because for some reason I feel, and I don't know if this is something that you want to talk, it's not particular. I'm not aware of, I don't smoke marijuana, but I'm getting into marijuana. But I feel like most people have to feel like there's a choice between marijuana and alcohol. I really do feel that. I do neither. None of them exist in my life. I don't feel comfortable with either of them or any drugs. The most I take is like an Advil when I have like a bad headache with PMS, but I try not to put anything in my body, and that's just me. But in my culture in Mexico, marijuana was the devil. It's not like here where it's much more acceptable now. But when I was coming up, marijuana was the equivalent of you murdering kittens. Like, it was like the most horrible thing in the world. And in US culture, even though it wasn't legalized until recently, it was just much more acceptable. It was almost like rite of passage. Like, people are super chill with it. Where I was coming from, marijuana was like, or drugs, like it was just like not acceptable in any way, shape, or form in the way that drugs are accepted in the US side of the border. And I'm talking about both prescription and illegal drugs. Like, there's a drug culture that exists in the US that is much more accepting of both prescription and illegal drugs, that in Mexico, there's like the taboos are endless about any kind of drug, legal or not. And that's what I grew up with. So alcohol is like the equivalent of drinking water. There's no taboos attached to it. Like I said, you're the absolutely weirdest person in the world if you're not drinking at the wedding or at the event. And that's how I grew up. And it's almost like me coming out as a non-drinker with my friends. I remember once, like, one of my friends came over and I had already posted about my sobriety and that it had been like a year or something. And he's like, no, but you actually do drink, right? And I'm like, no, dude, why would I post about me being sober for a year and like drink at home? Like, who does that? Like, no, I'm not lying about sobriety. Like, no. He's like, you really haven't had an actual alcoholic drink for a year? And I was like, yeah, I'm done. And he was like, he could not wrap his head around it. And he's someone I love dearly. He's not a heavy drinker. He's fine, normal, 100% beautiful human being. Could not understand the concept of me just not having alcohol in my life. And I think that's the majority of the people that I grew up with. Like I said, drugs are non-existent. So the only escape that's really kind of permitted, kind of socially accepted and totally normal is alcohol. So it's a part of everyday life. You were talking about how people leave work and they're expected to go drink. Like, there's a whole culture in Mexico, but in Mexico, and it's mostly the men, honestly, like, we have a different eating schedule, right? It's at 2 p.m., la hora de la comida. So many men, they go to la hora de la comida, which is our heavy dinner is earlier, it's at 2 p.m. and they sit down and you start drinking, and it's every single day from 2 p.m. until whatever time at night, and then work the next day. And that was my dad. Like, we grew up and this is completely normal, completely normal that heavy drinking starts on the weekdays at 2 p.m. for the work culture. Now it's more inclusive of women, but for me, it was all of the men, all of my uncles, all of my friends, dads, like it was just normal. It was just normal. And I grew up with it. So walking away from it was super, super weird in the beginning.
Oh my gosh, I can feel that energy you have around it and that expectation and how much it's just married to this idea of the good life, celebration and joy. And it's like you're taking that away. It's like you're taking culture away almost.
Yeah.
So
Oh, yes.
do you see people speaking up about, sobriety in this community, or just like, I mean, I think that there's also a penchant for healthier living, on Sundays in Mexico, I know like the streets are closed and people can go bike and roller skate, like times are shifting, I think, but do you see other people speaking up about this or?
I also spoke to this to my followers today, which is a little bit controversial, but they do like, they asked me to promote this conference on teen drinking in Mexico. And I have a complicated relationship with alcohol, and I've never been to the conference, and I'm very honest with my followers. And I'm like, I can't promote something that I don't know the language. I don't know the studies behind, I don't know, like I can't promote something that that I've never been to, and I don't know. But other than that, like my gut kept telling me, you cannot tell a teenager that drinking is bad if they're going to see you hammered every weekend and like at every wedding. And sometimes, like I said, in the afternoons at la comida at work, like, what are we talking about here? How are we the kids aren't going to stop drinking because somebody at a conference told them not to drink. The kids are going to probably end up repeating whatever cycle their parents did at home. I'm not an expert. I say this all the time. I make enchiladas for a living, but it makes no sense to me that we are not looking at it as a cultural issue that starts with us parents that grew up with alcohol like it was water, like it was oxygen. Like that's where the problem is. The problem is not, I think it's Gabor Mate that says, don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain. Like there's something there, and it's not initiated like at the club, like another really good one he has is like, trauma is the gateway. Yeah, it's not all these other things. It's not all these other factors. It's other undealt stuff that happens at home and with our parents and with our lineage and the stuff that we're carrying. And I think that is yet to be addressed on a deeper level in Mexico. There's a lot more awareness, like you said. Plenty of restaurants down in Baja offer mocktails, like you said, like it's a whole culture. It's definitely getting better, but it's harder for us. I think it's harder for that side of the border than this one, because a huge part of our culture revolves around alcohol.
Yeah. Well, I won't lie. Like, when I was, I guess in my mid-20s, like I got a sense of coolness literally from crossing the border and going to breweries in Tijuana or going to the wineries in the Valle. Like I literally thought that made me sophisticated, well-traveled, so it's someone who knows what the scene is. And, as I stopped drinking, like there was almost even a part of me like, oh, I'm going to miss that. And I'll tell you the truth. I'll go to the Valle now, anytime and just have a great time because I get to experience the food and the beautiful weather and the products and the people. So it's not just about the wine to me. I can just bring any other drink to me to experience that beauty. But there was something just so rich in it, and I think it's a lie to think it's just the ethanol part and that we can discover what that really, really is. And to your point, about kids, I meet a lot of parents who are literally maybe like it isn't a surface level problem, right? Like they don't have the vodka hidden somewhere, in their house, but how are they supposed to talk to their kids if they're not sure even the role that alcohol plays in their own life,
Yeah.
And that's often this impetus to just want to look at it. And that's the thing that's missing, I think, in our society is we're just not taught to really be aware and mindful in our relationships with alcohol. It's super black and white. You either drink or you don't, and it's a sad story.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, no, agreed. 100%. And going back to what you were saying about the Valle, one of my favorite parts about your book was when you such a simple concept, but you verbalizing it, I had like a big aha moment in the car about how your brain kind of associates that next drink with the reward, and it robs you of your ability to enjoy those such simple, beautiful things like a walk in a, in a beautiful park or a path or in Valle de Guadalupe. Like, and I connected to that so well. And that is such a difficult thing to explain to someone that doesn't live it, what it means like to live without having that anxiety of when you're going to be able to sit down with that next glass of wine. Like, it's so hard for me to explain that to people because it's like, if it's because it's someone like me and I'm surrounded by people like me that have been drinking since they were 14, 15 years old, and alcohol is the reward. Not it doesn't have to be like a I don't know the levels of alcohol. I don't know the terms, like I don't know I keep saying I make enchiladas for a living. So for people that were perhaps like me, that just really were desperate for the weekend for that reward, or for the day to be over so I could be sitting at the dinner table with my glass of wine, like it, just that train of thought that takes up so much of your brain that it robs you of those moments. And it's very difficult to explain to the people around me what it feels like when that is no longer taking space in your brain. Like how I always say, like, when people ask me, was it hard for you to stop drinking? And I'm like, well, a lot of anxiety was removed from my life. So much anxiety was removed from my life when I stopped drinking, that for me, it was the best choice I've ever made in my life. And I'm able, and I wish I could had better words to explain to people what it means to be able to live your life without waiting for thinking about that next moment where you're going to sit down with that margarita or that glass of wine. I love that part of your book and how you broke it down and how you explained it. I thought it was so good.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you saying that. And I just obviously relate to that since I went through it, but it's so true. I think like the reason why I'm so passionate about this lifestyle, and, I never talk about quitting forever or never drinking again. It's like, just take a break, just experience it. Because what if you do it and then you fall in love really with this feeling that is almost indescribable, but that I just never felt as a drinker, right? It was always the future type of, reward, like you said, or the pain of the next day. Like,
Yes.
I couldn't just be present. And that's the beautiful gift, I think, that we've been given with this lifestyle. I just want to say I'm so grateful for your time today. I'm really excited about your new book coming out. Can you just like give us a little details about that before I let you go?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm coming out with my new book. It's called My Familia's Cooking, Cocinando. I'm like, so many languages. Cocinando on Cook Street, a collection of Mi Familia's favorite recipes. And it's a bilingual cookbook where a recipes, they're all illustrated. And all of the ingredients are listed in both English and Spanish, and all of the whole recipe, the procedures in English and in Spanish. And every single one of my family members is illustrated in the book. Each one contributes a recipe. And for those that have been kind enough to follow me in the last few years, they will recognize my house because it's fully illustrated in the book. The book is just my house illustrated and turned into a beautiful illustrated cookbook. It was, the book was completely put together by Latinas in the industry. My illustrator is from Mexico City, Elisa Moreno. My publisher is Little Libros from Patti Rodriguez, which is the premier bilingual publisher here in the US for Latino books. My recipe, the layout person, my recipe tester were all Latinas from the community. So it was a labor of love that is finally out in the world that I'm very, very proud of.
Oh, I love that passion that you have for it. And we'll definitely include the links below so anyone listening can check it out. We'll also include links to your website so people can learn more about you. I just have to thank you not only for, coming on the show, speaking to my listeners, but you represent so much more than that. You represent talking about this alcohol-free lifestyle in the food world, in the Latino world. Like, it's just so important to hear your voice and the things that you went through and experienced. So thank you for representing like that.
Thank you. Somebody sent me an email the other day and she was like, it's so nice to see somebody that doesn't drink and is cool. And I was like, yeah. It was like a young follower. And I was like, we were so desperate for people out there, like you said, to teach us that you can be sober and be cool, man. I think I'm sort of a little bit still kind of cool. So thank you as well for being a young and powerful voice, and something that I think is much needed in society, especially for our young kids. Something else that you mentioned in the book that's really important that people should be aware of if they haven't read your book, that the marketing is always going to be for our kids, because you can't, like you said, convince a 43-year-old perhaps to try something new. So they're always going to go for our kids. So it's so great that you're out there being an example for our little ones or our younger ones coming up.
Oh, well, thank you too. You share that example with your family and the ripple effects it has. So appreciate you so much.
Thank you, my friend.